If you, copy someone else's picture without their permission, then it's not okay.
Right.
So with certain quilt things where you're just having like symmetry, kind of repetitive symmetry, you know what I mean? Like the same kind of basic blocks over and over in a simple color scheme, it wouldn't be that surprising if two quilts came out very, very similar, or even functionally identical.
Yeah.
In terms of what they look like, and we say copyright's going to allow for that.
Yeah.
So there's sort of like real traditional kind of quilts with a lot of symmetry and repetition. Copyright's going to be very thin, and there's really no way, unlike with photographs, there's no way to really copy I guess you could take a picture that was unauthorized of the quilt, but I mean, you can't really reproduce quilts in the same way, other works, like photographs, the way you can. Although someone could, take a picture and try to make another identical quilt. So, maybe we'd worry less about traditional patterns that are repeated, but if somebody did something really original, that would have more robust copyright. And I'm thinking that the best quilt I ever, or at least the quilt that was most attractive to me I ever saw, someone did a quilt that looked like a window in a house. So like the outside of the quilt looked like, wallpaper, and there was some furniture, and then there was the window, and then there was a scene outside the window of like some kind of vibrant natural scene. And it just struck me as absolutely remarkable. I'd never seen a quilt like that. I never understood people did quilts like that. And it won the prize. I think it was some kind of folk festival in Kutztown, Pennsylvania, some kind of folk art thing. And it kind of blew me away. So something like that, I could see someone say, wow, that's really original. So the scope of copyright, people could still do window scenes. They could steal the idea without violating copyright. They could do their own window scene. But if someone did exactly like the same wallpaper, you know what I mean, then we would say that copyright should cut off from from being identical or even being too similar.
Yeah. It's interesting, isn't it? Now, I think that so people are probably freaking out a little bit listening to you of like, oh, do I have to worry about, so I get a kit, can I make the kit? If I see some ideas on Pinterest, can I make them? In many ways, copyright law is a really goofy law because unless the copyright holder registers their work and takes you to court or sends you a cease and desist letter, there's a lot of fluidity in copyright law, I would say, right?
Right.
So how do we understand what you just said in like the practical? So if someone's out there and they're freaking out because of what you just said, how do we understand when is it a problem to copy something and or to make a kit or to use a copy, when is it a problem? When is it not a problem?
Yeah, that is a hard thing. So, of course, the great answer that's always correct in law school when you ask a law student is, it depends.
That's totally
right?
That's
because
right.
you can't really pin it down. But right. I think probably, like some of the more traditional patterns with, like the more traditional patterns that tend to be repetitive, there's less danger that anyone's going to claim ownership and complain.
Yeah.
And things that are unique, when people make kind of unique, much more unique visual statements, I think then you have to assume that there might be a problem if you identically copied or came very close to them.
So I
think
so
one of the things, so when people are going to when people are trying to win contests,
right,
and things like that, and there's different ways you could win, right? Someone just might have really good technique or something like that. That you can't read. That you probably can't repeat even if you want to, copy if you want to. But for the unique original designs, I think then you just take a little more care. I think you could, if you do a kit, then you want to start with something that, you think is either public domain or original, right? You could do research in public domains. It's older than, was it 1923? Something before then it's in the public domain, and that would be pretty safe. And probably there's a lot of quilts that you could work from that way, and a lot of designs you could have for your kit. So it wouldn't even be that, you wouldn't even need a lawyer really.
Yeah.
If you felt confident that you could date stuff. But for more contemporary stuff, I think some of the more pedestrian designs are probably safer, and some of the more complicated designs, if you're going to copy them identically, then you probably want to try to get, permission.
Yeah, and it seems like there's a number of levels. Like, as you said, if you're doing an exhibition or contest, be careful. Don't be rude. Don't steal somebody else's stuff. If you're trying to sell it, commercialize it, then you get into trouble. But if you're making it for your granddaughter, it's not going to, if you see something on Pinterest and you say, oh, I want to make that one too for my granddaughter, that's a whole
you're
different
not likely
thing,
to get caught.
Right?
I mean, even if it's a problem.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, I mean, I think
yeah, that's just like people. I'm sorry, I
Go
keep
ahead.
cutting you off. I'm sorry.
Yeah, sorry about that. Go ahead.
No, I was just going to say there's a like one of the cases I teach when I teach copyright is the daycare that drew pictures of like Disney characters on the wall.
Yeah.
And Disney sued for copyright infringement. And I was thinking, how many homes that was a common thing when I was growing up.
Yeah.
Was for sort of crafty moms to do like have Mickey Mouse on your, they hand drew Mickey Mouse on your wall. And Disney was complaining, well, it's a daycare center. What if there was like child abuse and we were associated? They're complaining. It's like, no, that's not I mean, they say that's the problem, but the real problem is they want you to have to go to a Disney store and buy decals, right? They don't want do-it-yourselfers. They want you to buy decals. And so really it wasn't a copyright. I mean, they used copyright as a frame, which kind of channel you to buy their stuff instead of do-it-yourself crafty kind of stuff. So when you kind of move that into the quilt stuff, I think you want to be, unless you're a business like a daycare center, where the public is in and someone rats you out to Disney. I have no idea Disney found out about that. Then, you're probably safe.
Yeah.
And it's not, I don't know if people go around trying to report each other for, because you wouldn't even know.
Yeah.
I think, frankly, unless something's really original, if it's something like sort of more traditional quilty, that it's probably easy to go back to do some research and show that it's not that original.
Yeah.
To make the plaintiff work to make the argument that that the copyright is thin.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I'm really looking forward to looking more into this. I think there's also what I've found from people is that there's also we don't have moral rights in the same way that you think it, but there's a moral element to it, a kind of right of integrity of, look, I made this was an idea, you took it from me, can you give me credit? Also, like the young pattern makers where, your guild is using it. Can you just pay me the $10 per person because it really matters to my business? So sure, on a strict copyright level, you may not need to, or they're not going to be able to enforce it. But like as a community, like community standards and customs, there's got to be some civility beyond copyright. Does that seem like a right way to think about it?
Yeah, but it's hard. I mean, you say that $10. I mean, some people have interesting ideas about what their things are worth.
Yeah.
It's not a quilt. My mom keeps backyard chickens, and she was building them a new house, and I saw this great. It was like called a chicken condo, and it was really adorable. Had multiple floors, and it was just really cute. But it was somewhere in Scandinavia is where they made them, so it was expensive, and then the shipping. And they weren't available in the U.S. These chicken condos. So I showed my mother a picture, and she's like, wanted one. And she also does woodworking. So she's like, well, see if you can get me the plans, and so I can make it. So I got in touch with the people, and I asked if they would sell the plans, and they wanted $1,500 for the plans.
That's really ridiculous,
come on. Like
right?
The coop itself was like, if you didn't have to worry about shipping, I think the coop itself was like cheaper than that.
Yeah.
And now I understand. I think we're going into business. If they thought we're going into business and we're going to undercut them on chicken coops, then sure, maybe, it would be one thing. But I mean, we were willing to sign off that we're going to make one copy, and then they could have the plans back, or we would burn them.
Right.
And they still wanted $1,500, and that was just, so she built a different coop.
Right. Very silly. Right. Just businesses not being smart about sort of personal use versus a commercial use, and what to really think about in terms of what's the risk of sending the plans to you. Right, and sort of what money they want to. Yeah, it's interesting. We live in really interesting times. Now,
yeah, we sure do.
What about, is there anything, so there are mostly women quilting. There's some men. We have a very active male people on our quilting army, and there's others that are non-binary, and all kinds of people quilt. But what should we be looking about on the gender side of thinking this issue? Is there stuff that we should be thinking about on gender and the law?
So this is again somewhat of a quandary, because on the one hand, the fact that there's not a lot of intellectual property rights assertion in quilting is a beautiful thing. It just leaves people feeling, freer to teach each other and borrow from each other, be inspired by each other, and so kind of a communal value. And frankly, that's something women have always had to do, because it's only recent history that we could vote, that we could even own land or have money, right? That the money and the land didn't belong to some man in our life, our husband, our father, our brother. So to get by, women always had to kind of collaborate and teach each other stuff. Cooking was an important skill for women, so people would share recipes. Quilting, other things too. So that comes from, I think, a beautiful place, but it also comes from subordination. So, and not being valued. Women are subordinated, so they did what they could. They helped each other, but they had no expectation of commodifying stuff, right? They weren't going to own businesses or start businesses. So the beauty of it, the sharing is a good thing. The fact that it came from subordination is not a beautiful thing, right? Like I want to see women make money just like men do. Women have businesses, women have rights, women assert those rights. Yeah. So I feel conflicted by this because I personally think low barriers, weak copyright is the better thing. I think that leads to more innovation and creativity, and even though I'm a lawyer, less litigation, so that's my kind of bent. But at the same time, when you look at who gets kind of ripped off, in music and quilting and whatever, it tends to be people of color and women, women of all races, especially women of color. Those are the people that get paid less and, less valued, and how to push back against that. Yeah. So I like the low IP spaces like quilting because I just think it appeals to me. On the other hand, money and power. I want subordinated people, women, people of color, to have more money and power. So it's always just uncomfortable with me.
Yeah. It seems like with quilting, so there's tons of quilt entrepreneurs. It's just an amazing, flourishing space of people starting small businesses on a variety of levels. And we see some based on labor and skill, like long armers, people who quilt other people's quilts for them. But then you also see a lot of inventors, and you also see ones that have, my favorite ones so far are what I'm calling consumables. So it's something like you have to use it up and you have to buy another one. So it doesn't really matter whether a pattern is easy to copy and there's a lot of problems. But if you need the actual thing, the batting or the interface or the paper that is printed on to do the craft, that to me seems really awesome. Because there's less likely of someone swiping it because it's too much effort to reproduce it. And people have to come back to you to buy it again and again. So that's so far my observations on this it kind of gets around the IP in some way because it's consumable and you need it again if you like it.
Right. Yeah. So something like a quilt is because it's the kind of the value in the production also, as opposed to making a copy of music, right? Where it's having the almost identical copy of a song without compensating anybody. But with a quilt, there's so much labor that goes into it. It's not a quick and easy, right? It's not someone's quickly ripping someone off. That even if they do an identical replica, it's still the materials and the time and labor that go into it are pretty extensive.
Yeah, they are.
So.
Well,
yeah, I feel like I consume it like infringement. I talk to my students the difference of a novel and a song. It's like you buy a novel and you usually only read it once and you're done. With a song, you listen to it over and over if you like it. Sometimes multiple times in one day. So why does copyright treat them the same when we consume them differently?
Right.
And then
so true.
you kind of move that over to quilting. It's like we consume quilts differently. And some people for their bed, some people as art. But I mean, it's the way that you consume a quilt. You want to have multiple copies of the song for your iPhone, for your car, whatever, maybe different devices. You don't usually want multiple quilts with the same pattern. I guess some people do, but mostly people would rather just have one of a kind quilts for kind of diversity.
Well, it's interesting because we're looking at licenses on fabric right now, and we're also looking at licenses that are part of patterns, and we see this huge variety of what people are saying. So they'll say things like, you can make this pattern, but only you can make it. You can't have anyone else make it. Or you can make one of these, but not at all. No, you can only make one, which I find really interesting. Yeah. It makes me think of Bob's Merrill and limiting licenses on things. Yeah. I just don't know how first sale doctrine, I don't know how those stand. They seem to, I understand
there's no privity, right? If you once there's probably, it's questionable whether a contract was even formed. Yeah. But the minute a third person enters the picture, there's no privity of contract. So enforcing it through contract is going to be tricky, but it's not enforceable through copyright at all, right? No. You can't just make stuff up and say it's copyright infringement.
And it seems like then the question, the part that I just get, this is where my head gets sort of, so I understand